So we're going to cover macros and micros, and to be honest, we're just covering micros, and we're only going to cover three important micros. We're going to cover iron, magnesium, iron, fish oils, and magnesium today. We purposely picked these three just because we believe they're quite important and a good starting point, and not trying to cover too much because we always do that and always go over time. So here we go. Okay. We know who I am and we know who Elizabeth is, so we can move on. So we're going to do some definitions today. We're going to look at just defining macros and micros, and then we're going to look at ones that we talked about there, and then provide you with some key takeaways. Okay, so I think everyone's pretty clear on what macros are. So these are pretty much the food components, okay, that we're consuming in large amounts to provide energy and to effectively sort your body out. Simply put, protein, fats, and carbohydrates, okay? And as I said, they're required in large amounts. I think we've covered, macronutrients fairly well, but obviously we would continue to go over those macronutrients throughout the program. And I think everyone understands the importance of, optimal amounts of protein, fat, and carbohydrates to perform at your best. And as it says there, we talk a lot about purpose and owning your purpose, and those macronutrient amounts and ultimately calories are dictated by what your purpose is. In terms of micronutrients, these are the chemical elements, okay, and they're required in very small amounts, but those trace amounts are still very, very significant. So even though they're very, very small, if they are deficient or insufficient, that could have serious impact on the body, on the body's health and your health, and ultimately your performance, okay? If you are deficient, as it says, it can cause severe and even life-threatening conditions. Certainly the ones we're going to talk about today probably aren't life-threatening in that sense, but they certainly can have a severe impact if they are insufficient or deficient. As I said, iron, magnesium, omega-3s. And I put the picture of the pill there because I think it's important when we talk about micros, it doesn't have to just be pills, okay? I think we are very much a food first, yet not food only approach. So when supplementation is required, and in certain cases there is a need for supplementation, then it should be considered. Now that consideration should be in discussion with a healthcare professional, and a healthcare professional can be your doctor, your dietitian, your nutritionist, or a combination of all of them put together. And I think that is an important consideration. I think also talking, if you do have a coach, with your coach about any concerns you've got, and then leaning in on the experts is a really good way. What I would say is don't supplement just because you think someone on Instagram told you to. Okay, iron considerations. So sources. Where does iron come from? Predominantly meat, okay? So your meat products, animal sources are going to be better sources of iron, and that's what we call heme iron sources. You can, however, get non-heme iron sources, and these are going to be from sort of your dark, leafy, cruciferous vegetables. Now, the body can assimilate those, but the bioavailability of heme iron is going to be much better than non-heme iron sources. Elizabeth's obviously an expert in plant-based athletes, and I will get her just to chime in with her thoughts around that.
So it's definitely something that I see in a lot of my plant-based athletes. They are significantly lower. And in combination with the heavy training that they're doing, a lot of these are female athletes that are also predisposed to being lower in iron. So it's definitely something worthwhile and important because it has such a great effect on performance. And while you can, if you're really making an effort, you can consume a significant amount of that non-heme iron. But like Scott said, the bioavailability is low. And so it would take a very calculated diet, very planned out, to make sure that you're even getting the optimal amounts, and then also the blood testing to make sure that you're even absorbing and utilizing those amounts. Testing. I'll just continue on with that. Get your blood work done because even if you think that you are consuming some, I'm always low in iron. I have tried consuming, I've done iron pills, like liquid ferritin, I've done injections. My body is just not great at actually utilizing it. And so different types didn't work. And the importance of testing is not only to know if you are low, but then also if you're supplementing, if that's actually working.
Yep. And the testing is important in that you are going to obviously get certain markers, and we can talk about that testing. So if you are doing an iron panel, it needs to be a full iron panel. So it's not just serum iron. Serum iron is probably the least important. You want to be getting ferritin checked. Transferrin saturation and hemoglobin are certainly probably the three key markers in determining whether you're iron deficient non-anemic, or iron deficient anemia. There are other considerations, things like your B12 status and folate status is also going to impact iron status. So as Elizabeth said, if there isn't also a problem within the gut, maybe because of ongoing gut irritation or gut disease, then it could be an absorption problem as well that could maybe be rectified through a targeted nutritional approach.
And I can attest that under eating, when I was under fueling, it was very difficult.
What's that?
Oh, I was just going to say, when I was under fueling consistently, it was very difficult for my body to absorb. And so I think your point about not having a healthy gut, eating, like using other foods and other minerals, our body does work synergistically. So it's important that you are making sure that you're consuming enough and a varied diet, so that if you are taking different supplements or trying to balance out different mineral levels, that you're actually achieving that.
Yeah, exactly. And that comes back to this health part. So, what does iron do? Iron helps with energy production because it is associated with hemoglobin, which is the oxygen carrying molecule in your blood. So cardiovascular health, energy production is going to be impacted by iron. And that's a really important consideration as an athlete and someone who's trying to perform at their absolute best. Now, there is low iron and there's also concerns with high iron. Hemochromatosis is a genetic disorder which results in iron overload. And that, again, is a consideration for an athlete. And that would be a reason why you want to get tested, to ensure that if you do have too much iron, that can also be unhealthy. And certainly you don't want to be supplementing with iron supplements if you have that genetic disorder. As we touch on performance, the energy is going to be affected. Anyone who has had, and Elizabeth can attest to this, and I'm actually, my ferritin levels are historically very low. It's always been put down to, training load, although I don't think that is the case. I actually think, and I have seen this improve again, I'll just refer to alcohol, and it's not that drinking a lot, it was just that alcohol seems to be, by removing alcohol from my diet, my iron, my ferritin stores have actually come up considerably, and the effectiveness on the dosing regime which I've used has actually been, it seems, again, it's correlation with the removal of alcohol from the diet, but it certainly seems to have improved the absorption of that iron in the gut. And so the impact, I guess, is ultimately that, if you are anemic, you're going to have, you're going to have low energy levels, and that is going to negatively impact your mood. It's going to negatively impact your ability to perform the sessions that your coach is looking to get you to do. And that's probably, in terms of performance, that's what we're talking about here. Do you have anything to add to that, E?
Nope.
Cool. And then supplementation. So I'll go to the next slide. Ultimately, in terms of supplementation, what are we talking about? There are two forms that we can touch on. There's ferrous sulfate, and then there's also what's called a polymaltose iron supplement. One isn't necessarily better than the other, but the polymaltose can be better tolerated and maybe reduce constipation and signs and symptoms associated with iron supplementation. Typically, a ferrous sulfate supplement would be provided if you are defined as being deficient non-anemic, or deficient with anemia. The dosage that we'll get into, so I guess probably taking a step back maybe and thinking about what are the categories for that. And I do have that on the next slide, but I will go through them. So in terms of deficiency, your levels are defined as if your ferritin is less than 35 micrograms per liter, with hemoglobin being greater than 11.5 grams per deciliter, or if you're working in grams per liter, that's 115 grams per liter, with a transferrin saturation of over 16%. Now, again, I'm sure you're all potentially scribbling all this down. We can provide this as a key takeaway slide. Deficiency in terms of non-anemia is your ferritin being less than 20. Okay, the other ones remain the same in terms of hemoglobin and your transferrin saturation. And then you pop into deficiency anemia, which is your ferritin of less than 12 micrograms per liter. But you also have your hemoglobin being less than 11.5 or less than 115 grams per liter. And your transferrin saturation is also dropping. So as opposed to the others, your transferrin saturation is now less than 16%. And this is why getting a full iron panel is really important, and looking at those levels in order to determine what level of deficiency you have in iron, and then how do you treat that. In terms of when we start treating that, as I said, there is differing schools of thought. There is one school of thought of daily supplementation, and this is around 65 milligrams of elemental iron, which if we look at a ferrous sulfate, that's around 325 milligrams. There is, however, an alternate dosing regime, which has been studied and sort of looked at, and it is just as effective as daily supplementation, and can be better in terms of adherence to that regime. But for some people, doubling that dose, so effectively taking on 650 milligrams or 130 milligrams of elemental iron, that can sometimes be not as well tolerated and result in things like constipation. So it's really up to what the individual athlete may prefer. It's what the doctor may prefer if they are prescribing this. And so it is probably a play on what you prefer. I know with athletes that we've been working on this, they tend to do an alternate dosing regime with that double dose of around 130 milligrams of elemental iron, and it is having a positive effect. One of the professional athletes that we work with, she's actually going to be talking about this and how it has a positive impact on her ferritin levels and her hemoglobin levels, and bringing her out of that iron deficient status. Do you want to have a little chat, just my voice?
Sure. I think, again, ingredients, dosage, timing. Scott, do we talk about food timing as well?
Yep. So I think in terms of timing around supplementation with food, the ferrous sulfate, you should avoid caffeine or dairy within 60 minutes of each side of that to improve absorption. The interesting thing about the polymaltose, the iron polymaltose, is that potentially iron absorption isn't affected by food consumption. So that could be another reason to take the polymaltose. And I have been taking the polymaltose. So I take a product called Multifer, which I think is an Australian product, but it's been very well tolerated. And again, I tend to take it at night. So in terms of timing, I think iron supplementation is better taken at night, purely because there's no interference with caffeine at all. I mean, you're not going to be drinking caffeine, hopefully, in the evening, and you've probably had, 7 to 8 hours off caffeine by that point in time.
And what about around exercise? I had read that it should either be before, because of the inflammation response that exercise influences.
Yeah, I mean, you'll hear, again, I don't know if there's any hard science, and I'm happy to be proven otherwise, but I think the discussion is take it around, again, within 60, not within 60 minutes of your exercise, to help with improvements of absorption and bioavailability. But again, the hard science on that, I don't know if it actually exists. So again, if you take it in the evening, the majority of athletes probably aren't exercising within 60 minutes of going to bed. So that could be one thing. If ferritin levels are very, very low, there is the consideration, if there is anemia plus or minus, that an iron transfusion could be used as well. And that can be very effective, but that's obviously a discussion with your doctor about how immediate the concern is with the deficiency and whether an iron transfusion is required. What else? I think what's really interesting is looking at statistics of endurance athletes and certainly triathletes with iron deficiency. So the statistics sort of vary, but males up to around 11% of endurance athletes or triathletes have been found to be iron deficient, and levels of up to 35% of female triathletes, which, if you think about that, that is a staggering amount, especially for females, especially for menstruating females as well. So you've got to consider that obviously blood loss is going to occur if you have your regular cycle, which obviously we want to encourage and avoid things like LEA. So I guess one of the points is if you are coming out of LEA and you are actually getting your menstrual cycle back, it could invariably be something to consider because it could adversely affect your iron stores. And that's something that maybe a lot of female athletes who haven't had their period actually consider as they get it back.
Scott, I'm asked this a lot. Should, during the week of our cycle or leading up to it, should females load, even if we're not low, should we either add an iron supplement in, or even if we are low, should we double that or take into consideration?
I honestly couldn't answer that. I'd have to take advice from a doctor. I mean, what's your experience with that?
My experience is I feel better if in the days leading up to my period, I add my iron supplement. I feel, again, it's anecdotal, and I too have no evidence to support it, but it's something that I've found helps me. And again, if that could be because I'm sleeping better or because I have more energy, so my workouts are better, I'm recovering better, I don't know, but I found it to be helpful.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure. It might be interesting to have a medical spokesperson to discuss that and have a look in the research. I think the other thing we forgot to touch on in terms of foods and supplementation and things to consider, vitamin C at the time of taking your iron supplement should be considered. It doesn't have to be a vitamin C pill. It could be something as delicious as a kiwi fruit, which ultimately has a lot of serotonin in it, and that could maybe help you sleep better as well. So something as simple as a kiwi fruit or an orange or any citrus fruit would provide you with, or some strawberries or blueberries or anything like that would supply you with that sort of 100 milligrams of vitamin C. If you do want to take a pill or you are taking a iron supplement that combines vitamin C in it, then that's probably pretty smart as well.
And I think too, on a lot of athletes will say or look at that like, oh, I did a big heavy training session, I'll have that gigantic steak for dinner. I've seen the studies, and I know Inside Tracker highlighted this as well, to save it for your rest day, not that directly after your very hard Saturday brick session, or so save that meal, that big steak meal for the Sunday or Monday or whatever.
Yep. And look, I mean, I think the most important thing with all of this, like any supplementation regime, is consistency and adherence to it. So if you are going to do the daily dosing, just don't skip it. If you are going to do the alternate dosing, then don't skip it. That's probably the most important thing. And don't expect things to change really quickly. So in terms of iron status and ferritin status, certainly it's going to take time. And we're talking weeks and probably, 8 weeks. So we're talking months actually for things to get back to normal levels. So this is just the key takeaways, and we've obviously discussed this, but I think, from bodily function performance wise, you are going to have impact in terms of energy and cardiovascular health. As mentioned, it is actually very prevalent in female athletes who are doing endurance sport, but it is actually fairly, 10% of males can be iron deficient as well. So I think that's really important. The levels there, as I described, for deficiency, non-anemia, and deficiency anemia are all there. So that's, as I said, it all comes down to ferritin levels, and then plus or minus the hemoglobin with the transferrin saturation and looking at that. Your best food sources are animal products, but you can get iron through non-heme sources, which is your leafy dark greens. The duration for improvements in this is going to be weeks. The other thing about best food sources I would consider is maybe cooking with cast iron pans. That is another way of increasing iron absorption into the food that you're having. And then if supplementation is required, ferrous sulfate, as it says there, there's 2 dosing regimes that you could use. either the lower dose and daily or the higher dose and alternate days. And then there's also the option for iron polymaltose, which is a fairly good dose, you know, something like between 100 milligrams and 200 milligrams of elemental iron. And it may not be impacted by food. And then, as we said, the dosing regime, whether you go daily or alternate, the most important thing is adherence to that. Does anyone have any questions at this point in time? Feel free, don't be shy if you want to, or we can keep going.
I think we had one. What if your ferritin is too high?
Yep. So you want to get checked that you don't have hemochromatosis, and that's a genetic marker. I can't remember what the genetic marker is, but you should talk to your doctor about getting screened for that. Some other things that can impact that is you could have an autoimmune disease that can be an indication of inflammation. It can be an indication of excessive alcohol intake. It could also be related to metabolic syndrome. If you've got high iron, you tend to have high glucose as well. So things like that would be probably repeating the test and making sure that it is actually accurate, and then monitoring that probably every 2 to 3 months, and then speaking to your doctor about that.
And then,
if you're taking an iron supplement and your ferritin's too high, then obviously come off the ferritin supplement, the iron supplement.
And do you need to request your doctor to test for iron, or is that pretty standard?
You need to request a full iron panel as a triathlete. So I would say you need to be asking, as we said, and when we lay out in the Fuelin what you're asking for, but you're certainly asking for a full iron panel, including the ferritin. Hemoglobin will be covered in a full blood count, and so will hematocrit, but your transferrin saturation, your total iron binding capacity won't always be covered. So I would certainly be asking your doctor to ensure that they're included in that panel.
And then lastly, off topic, but intrigued by the comment about serotonin in kiwi. Are there other natural sources like kiwi? I know eggs, pineapple, salmon, nuts and seeds.
What for serotonin or for iron?
Yeah, for serotonin, because you commented the kiwi helped with the serotonin.
Well, that was only a takeaway because it's got vitamin C, and then we talked about sleep last week. So it's an interesting thing. So yeah, I mean, any of the animal products as well will have tryptophan, as we discussed. So all the products all the food ingredients you mentioned, certainly full of tryptophan. With the carbohydrate, that pushes through tryptophan across the blood-brain barrier. That's going to improve the potential for the serotonin pathway to be activated and ultimately improve melatonin production, which could help you sleep. So if you're taking iron, maybe consider something like your kiwi fruit, because it's got serotonin in it, or any other animal product, or seeds and nuts that contain tryptophan, and hopefully you get a good night's sleep and some extra iron.
Perfect. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. Whew, I'm going to stop talking.
All right. So omega-3s, I think that this is a good time to just do a quick primer on the omega family. Like I call it the omega family tree, because we hear so much information. So the top level view, you've got omega-3s, omega-6s, omega-9s. There's omega-7s, but I'm just covering the top 3. The omega-3s, that's like your queen bee. You have to source them. They're essential. Your body does not produce them. We need them. They're wonderful for us. Your omega-6s, it's kind of like your basic bitch omega, like you get them a lot of places, standard in our diet. Still though, you need to consume them because your body does not make them on your own. And then your omega-9s, your body does produce those. They act more like omega-3s in terms of reducing inflammation and helping with joint and bone health. So when you're looking at those omega-3s, coming down from there, this is where you have that like ELA, AHA, ELA, EPA, DHA, all the letters, ALA, EPA, and DHA. So the sources of where you're getting some of these, the omega-3s, DHA specifically, you're looking at the fatty fish. So salmon, mackerel, herring, all of the tinned fish that Scott loves, caviar, sea vegetables, some of those. And then coming from there also, you can get walnuts, hemp seeds, flax seeds, chia seeds. So those are your omega-3, best omega-3 sources. Testing, this is definitely not a standard blood test to get. It's something that you will have to request either as part of a specific panel. And when you are getting that test, you don't just want to look at your omega-3 levels, you want to look at the ratio, because that is important in terms of heart health, brain health. You want to know what is actually, like, are you consuming enough of each? Because the omega-6s are inflammatory and will counteract and decrease the availability of the omega-3s that you're taking.
What should they be requesting in terms of from their doctor? Do you know specifically what they should ask for?
Yes. What's the name that you always tell us that I can never remember?
So there's two things. There is actually just the omega-6 to 3 ratio, which E mentioned, and then the other one is what's called an omega index. Now, yes, it might be easier, and I probably would recommend most people to do this, is just go to Omega Quant. So in last week's Roundup newsletter, I mentioned this about, and I provided the link. So you want to get the Omega Index Complete test. It costs about $90, I think. And honestly, it's the best test you'll ever get. It gives you 100% breakdown on the Omega Index, and we'll discuss the significance of the index in a little bit. It will give you the breakdown of 6 to 3 ratio. It will also give you a key breakdown of the key fatty acid, omega-6 fatty acid versus the key fatty acid, omega-3. And then it will give you a really thorough breakdown of every other fatty acid in your red cell membrane, which is how they're doing the testing. And they also supply you with the best sources to get that. So it sort of breaks down all the sources of omega-3s that you can get through various, obviously, fish products and whatnot. So it is a very cool test, and it's very actionable. Yeah, and we'll discuss what the results of that look like in a little bit.
And then in terms of overall health, what omega-3s will actually do for your body. I wrote a post about this that was in the newsletter a month or so ago. Cardiovascular benefits, brain health benefits, anti-inflammatory. Studies have shown it helps with diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's. It helps with muscle growth, lowering inflammation, helping recovery. Some studies have shown that it can help with PMS symptoms. So the list is endless when it comes to, and again, tying in with performance, thank you, muscular strength training especially. There were some studies that linked more benefits after strength training when supplementing with 4 grams a day of omega-3s, which is a significant amount.
And those benefits, what in particular around which benefits did they see?
Enhanced VO2, enhanced muscle building, metabolism, increase in metabolism, bone health.
And they also found a reduction in, probably the most immediate, and the reason why I supplement with omegas after training is delayed onset muscle soreness was reduced. So if anyone suffers from delayed onset muscle soreness or DOMS, it certainly is something that I would advocate. And whether it's placebo effect or not, I think it does have an effect on DOMS. Do
you do the high 4 gram dose, or?
Yeah, I take just over 3 grams of EPA with some DHA.
And you like cod liver oil, correct?
I am using cod liver oil at this point in time. So it's only because Mel bought that. And so, yeah,
I thought it was because you liked it.
I take what I get, so what I get given. What's the impact then of having low omega-3s on health and performance potentially?
So I think the, key impact, aside from energy level, and ability to recover from workouts is the fact that the enhanced endurance capability. So several studies showed that endurance improvement, there was significant endurance improvement in athletes that supplemented with omega-3s.
Did they explain the mechanistic aspect of that? In terms of, was it more because they had some extra calories on board, or was
I think it was
in
because of the heart health benefits, the increased capacity for blood flow, for the lowered inflammation levels. I think that was although a higher calorie consumption actually makes sense probably on the athletes that they were testing.
It's only 3 grams though, yes. So.
But if you're getting it in fatty fish, as opposed to a supplement, that could increase that as well. Good question.
And I think the other thing in terms of impact, so this omega index, a paper recently came out, and the omega index, you should be aiming for a level of around optimally 8%. So athletes or anyone should be having a level of between 8 and 12%. Typically what we'll see in the Western diet is a level around about 3 to 5%. Again, a lot of this is correlation, but what they're correlating is that those individuals with the percentage of 8% or above will typically have a reduced rate or reduced risk incidence of developing cardiovascular disease, cancers, diabetes, but more importantly, more recently, the link to Alzheimer's disease. So those individuals who had and again, there's a lot of correlation here, because obviously those people who are eating more fish or taking on that, maybe they're not doing a lot of other unhealthy dietary practices, but the link was there to give you an overall reduced risk ratio for Alzheimer's disease if you have an 8% or above omega index. So anyone with a family history of Alzheimer's or a history of concussions or anything like that, again, it's another very good reason to go and get tested.
Supplementing, I think we'll talk a little bit about in the next, but as Scott said, and the research shows, between 2 to 3 grams a day, more if you're low, if needed, and if you don't consume them in your diet. Ingredients you really want to look for, it's marine omega-3s. So there's plant-based alternatives, but again, those are providing not the EPA and DHA, but the ALA, so lower absorption. I'll
say one thing on that though. There are some recent products, so they're algae, and they will provide DHA and EPA. So they are vegan alternatives for those individuals, and you can actually get EPA and DHA from them. We used a product called Brain Armor, which had a significant impact on the players, the athletes at the Maple Leafs in terms of improving their omega index over 8 weeks supplementation with that product if you are a vegan. It is quite expensive though, as an alternative to, say, a good quality fish oil.
And then dosage, again, 2 to 4 grams per day. Doesn't matter particularly when you take it. As Scott said, if to help with muscle soreness, you can take it after training. Taking it with a meal, a lot of times there's that fishy aftertaste or burp. So if you're experiencing that, there's other brands you can try. There's ones that have lemon in them, or taking them with a meal that can help. And then timing, consistency, again, daily. It's one of those that I would consider like the supplements that you take for life, for long-term health and longevity.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point, is that you should not be looking at omega-3s as a medicine that is in the short term. So I think, again, a lot of the research, and they're trying to look at this in terms of longer studies, but the effect of chronic supplementation from, say, your teenage years and the impact that could have on risk reduction for these chronic diseases. That's what's now being investigated. And I think overall it should just be viewed that this is something you do. Your omega-3 intake is either through fish and combined potentially with some plant-based forms, things like flaxseed and whatnot, and E, actually, I'll get you to describe other sources of ALA from a plant-based perspective. But doing that, if you're not eating fish and you don't want to eat that, then certainly supplementing with a good quality fish oil. And I think back to the ingredients, the things you want to look for is that the stability and how it's been distilled. So it's been cleared of heavy metals, and it's also clear of BPAs by, what are BPAs? By phenol, oh, I should remember this, by polyphenol. Oh, I'll come back to you on that, but BPAs are effectively, you don't want to have them in there. They're just terrible toxins that should be cleared and should be distilled from any quality fish oil. So something like the Pillar. Pillar is obviously the company that we believe in terms of micronutrition. There is obviously Thorn as well, but with the Pillar fish oil capsules, they're extremely concentrated, but they're sourced from Arctic cod, and they're distilled, they're cleared of all heavy metals and these BPAs. So we're comfortable with that as an ingredient, and the dosage is, as I say, I think per capsule you're getting around 900 milligrams of EPA combined with some DHA.
And I think, Scott, that's an important point too when you're talking about BPA. So for athletes that are, and it applies to everyone because none of us want BPA in our system, but athletes that are either looking to have children or currently have children or are currently pregnant, it's something you have to be specifically and very much more aware and cautious about, because they've done studies now showing BPAs in breast milk, and that fetal development time, which is why it's so important to be taking DHA when you're pregnant, but also watching where you're sourcing that from, because what you're getting is not only getting into your baby, but then getting into your breast milk. So really being very mindful. And the BPA was lasting in the system for up to, like, I don't know, let's say like 3 or 4 years. So again, even if you're not considering family now, it's something to consider long-term, looking at your health.
Yeah.
All right. Key takeaways. Again, ALA, EPA, and DHA. ALA come from your plant sources. So for the plant-based athletes, the best ways to consume these, your chia seed, flaxseed, hemp seed. Flaxseed oil is also very good and higher in absorption than ground flaxseed. The sea vegetables, chlorella, spirulina, the kelp, sea algae, walnuts have some. So again, seeds, nuts, sea veggies, and then some products now are fortified. You can find soy milks, tofu, some of those kinds of things fortified as well. And then EPA and DHA fish sources, fatty fish sources are your best. As Scott pointed out, measure, monitor, manufacture. It is a consistent practice. You want to have at your omega 3 and 6 ratio, have the omega test done. As Scott said, omega index complete. Go back and look for that link. I know I'm actually going to go take that test. Again, best food sources: mackerel, salmon, cod liver oil, herring, sardines, caviar for the fancy, what's better, fancy, anchovies. Benefits for athletes. So if you're going to look at it, improving cardiovascular and VO2 performance, improving recovery, delayed muscle onset, can help with sleep, and it can help with strength gains, metabolism. So if you're looking at body composition as well, dosage, again, 1 to 4 grams a day, and then taking it consistently with your meal.
Well said. In terms of just the dosage, what people often mistake is they look on the front of the label of an omega and it will say 1,000 milligrams. You've got to look at the actual per capsule quantity and look at the EPA, DHA, because often the very cheap quality fish oils will state very large amounts of omegas in them, but then when you actually go into the per serve dose, there'll be like 3 capsules and it will give you maybe 500 milligrams of EPA, DHA. So actually, if you think that, then you'd have to be taking 18 pills a day. So unless you want to swallow 18 fish capsules, I would strongly suggest looking at a company like Pillar, because at least you only have to swallow 2 to 3 pills, which is much more manageable. The other thing I'd just say on this before we move on to magnesium is that there is a lot of talk about what's important. Is it EPA? Is it DHA? Because EPA is not actually found in the brain. DHA is, but EPA seems to have an influence on DHA in the brain. EPA is related more to systemic inflammation and systemic sort of what's in your body. There are studies where there's been some really positive studies with fish oils, and then there's been some not so positive studies in terms of lack of effect. I think the ones that have been very effective have been dosing with, as Elizabeth said, sort of that 3 to 4 grams or 3 to 4,000 milligrams of EPA with some DHA. So there is a little bit of sort of like, do you just need EPA and that will have a positive impact? There are some prescription medications that are like 4,000 milligrams of EPA, and that was studied and shown to be beneficial in the Japanese population. So there are those sort of considerations to have as well. I think, yeah, that's probably about it about that. So anyway, we can discuss that afterwards. Okay, magnesium sources. So we're talking plants, a lot of plant-based vegetables. The issue with magnesium at the moment is potentially farming methods having depleted the soil of magnesium, which is then going into the food. And this seems to be an issue in sort of first world countries where farming methods have done this. So you will typically get all your you can't produce magnesium in the body, so you do have to consume it. And so depending on the quality of the food that you're consuming could have the impact on what you're actually, your levels of red cell magnesium. Do you have any best sources to be really precise with, like, what would you recommend as best sources of magnesium from a plant-based perspective?
Nuts and seeds. So I would say pumpkin seeds is my like go-to. Have those on just about everything. I think that's probably the easiest. And then all of your leafy greens and tofu, soy products, sure, tempeh. Yeah, those would be my
peas. I always remember getting told peas were very good. Is that
sorry,
true?
I forget that because I hate peas. So yeah. I like block them out of my mind. But yes, peas are good.
Yeah, and frozen peas, look, it's one of those things that you probably hate because you were force fed them as a kid, but frozen peas in the freezer, if you're really struggling for some vegetables, they are actually a pretty good option, and just put a bit of butter in them and they taste a lot better. So testing. So again, comes back to blood testing to understand what your magnesium levels are. Now, this comes down to red cell magnesium. So a bit like the omegas, when you're testing the red cell membrane, it has to be the same with magnesium. Your magnesium levels are only going to be accurately assessed through red cell magnesium testing. You would have to ask your doctor to specifically test red cell magnesium. And that is really important if you are considering assessing your magnesium in order to potentially improve something that you want to take the magnesium for.
So if on a standard blood panel, it comes back with your magnesium being regular or in optimal levels, that's not really we don't know that it's optimal.
Correct. It's a bit like B12. If it's just a regular serum B12 test, then it's a waste of time. That's what I'd probably say. So I'll probably get hung out to dry for saying it's a waste of time by someone on social media, but that's my take on it. So I'm happy to be proven wrong as well. If there's a medic out there that wants to say that it is worth testing magnesium, I'm certainly open to it, but my understanding is, based on the research I've read, is that red cell magnesium is what you want to have tested. And what are the causes, I guess, is probably malnutrition. So diet is probably first and foremost the consideration for in relation to health. High alcohol intake, alcoholism, so probably drinking well in excess of sort of, I don't know what the definition of alcoholism is now, but certainly if you are drinking too much, your magnesium levels could be impacted. Medications, PPIs, proton pump inhibitors, can actually have an effect. Any diuretics, any chemotherapy. That actually reminds me, for the omegas, if you are taking a blood thinner like aspirin or anything like that, you need to talk to your doctor about taking omegas, because high dose omegas will thin the blood. And that's part of the impact, I guess, on cardiovascular health. So other things that can cause magnesium to drop is things like breastfeeding, diarrhea, and then anything like thyroid or hormone irregularities. So if you have thyroid dysfunction, hypo or hyper, then I believe magnesium can be negatively impacted. And high magnesium levels, if that was something that come on, is probably an indication of kidney failure. So whether that's acute or chronic, you certainly want to be checked out by your doctor if you're reporting high magnesium levels and you're not supplementing.
And I want to add in that oral contraceptives also lower magnesium levels, FYI.
Oh, I didn't know that. There we go. And then I think in terms of performance, you know, there's all different forms of magnesium, and I guess the one we've touched on in terms of the last week or so is focused on magnesium bisglycinate and its impact on sleep. I think magnesium will also have an impact. So as we said, on sleep, it can have an impact on muscle contraction and energy production. So I think, again, the magnesium type that you're taking should be directed to what you're trying to impact. Okay, so if it's magnesium bisglycinate, it would be you're taking that to try and improve sleep quality. Magnesium threonate could be used for cognition and brain function. Magnesium oxide, I believe, is better for muscular, penetrating the muscle and getting deeper into it, and magnesium citrate as well.
If I wanted help with sleep and wanted to focus during the day at work, could I take one during the day and one at night?
Yeah, I guess so. Theoretically, it'd just be pain in the ass to have to do it. But
I just see a lot of those like brain pills, you know, that they advertise in mental focus and clarity. And so people might be taking those and not realizing that that's coming from magnesium, and then also might be taking a magnesium to sleep. So
yeah, and I guess that's just looking at what you're taking and the dosages in them. Most of those focus pills, they probably have a little bit of caffeine in them, and that's what's actually giving you the focus. So just, and then you look at the dosage that they're delivering, and it's probably a terrible dosage. So very low, which comes on a supplement. So looking at the ingredients, so you need to look at what type of magnesium you're consuming, because that is going to be specific to what you're trying to impact. Dosages for magnesium bisglycinate is around 400 to 600 milligrams. Timing of that should be in the evening if you're directly trying to impact sleep. And that's, I think there's so many forms of magnesium that honestly, in today's talk, if we really wanted to dive deep into magnesium, if it's something everyone's interested in, we can certainly look at that and look at all the different forms of magnesium and the impact it has. But certainly the most commonly discussed impact of magnesium seems to be sleep. Magnesium bisglycinate is the one type of form of magnesium which has been studied and shown to impact sleep positively. I know Huberman talks about magnesium threonate as being something that impacts sleep, but honestly, I have reached out to him to send information related to RCTs or meta-analysis on magnesium threonate and its impact on sleep, and I haven't heard anything back, and I cannot find anything on the internet to support the claims that he's making about magnesium threonate. So I'm not trying to start a fight, I'm just saying I just can't find the evidence. So if anyone has that, or if Mr. Huberman, Dr. Huberman wants to respond to my request, then I would certainly be open to it. Magnesium bisglycinate, however, is found in, again, I'm only referencing Pillow because we believe in them. Their product has magnesium bisglycinate, magnesium citrate, and they're going to kill me. I can't remember the third type of magnesium, but all in all, it delivers an effective dose, which is fantastic. And it does help sleep. I have taken the product, I've recommended it to other athletes, and it, you know, immediately people will report improvements in sleep quality, sleep duration, and if you are tracking, they often see improvements in HRV just through even a single dose, actually. So whether, again, it's placebo or not, in terms of perceived better sleep, it seems to be effective. And I think based on the science that we have with magnesium bisglycinate, if you have a sleep issue, then it can be effective if you take magnesium bisglycinate and don't have any sleep issues, you probably won't see any benefit. So don't just take it because it helps sleep. If you don't have any issues with sleep, then don't take it.
And FYI, I went to look to order some and they are sold out at the moment. It must be that good. So if you guys are going over to Google, hold on, I'll let you know when they have it back in stock.
Well, and again, like, you know, we obviously have a relationship with them, but they are moving into the feed. So my understanding is Matt Johnson from the feed has been in contact with them, and the product will come onto the feed and be available through the feed as well, which is really cool. And that's going to be their key product on the feed. So
yeah, that should be, this is Jordan. Yeah, that should be early March, that timing. So a few weeks away.
Awesome.
But I actually, just to add on the magnesium, and I took it. I was in France last week and I took it when I returned and had zero jet lag. Normally I would be coming back from France and like waking up at 2, 3 a.m. But taking the magnesium, I think, really helped my sleep and adjust even for jet lag. So I'm not sure if other people have experienced that, but that was a kind of cool experience I had last week.
Yeah, and Jordan, look, honestly, and I know anecdotal stuff is like the lowest form of evidence, and I fully support that. But when you start hearing enough anecdotal reports, there's like, okay, the science is supporting those anecdotal reports even after taking it once. So I think there's certainly something there, and I think what they've produced is a very, very good product. I know we're I know we're nearly on time, so we've covered all this, but red cell magnesium levels less than 1.65 millimoles per liter is what you're looking at. If you're less than that, then certainly consider that. I put in the stats about athlete population affected. They did a 10-year study, I think it was, on New Zealand athletes, which again, New Zealand has very good farming practices and very fertile soil. They found 22% of their professional track athletes were deficient red cell magnesium. Now that's in a country like New Zealand. So I think the numbers of athletes that are actually deficient or insufficient in terms of red cell magnesium, I think it could be way higher than that. And I think it's one of those tests that as an athlete, from a performance standpoint, but also a health standpoint, I think could be really impactful on you, especially if you have issues with sleep, potentially improvements if you've got high blood pressure, if you're struggling with energy. Magnesium and iron will go hand in hand. Sorry, my voice is shot. Glucose regulation, and then obviously brain function and the relationship to the serotonin pathway. So I think, you know, if you are going to do it, if you have any of those issues and you are red cell magnesium deficient or insufficient, then using a magnesium source could be beneficial to you.
Okay, okay, I was just gonna say, no more talking for you. All right, let's open it up to some questions. I think I've looked through all the ones in the chat, but I would love if you guys turned your camera on, spoke up, asked some questions. We covered a lot today, even just on 3. Okay, well, maybe
no questions? Come on.
Maybe we just did an excellent job.
Brian, any questions? You're good. Anne-Marie, have you been tested? Have you had your red cell magnesium? Have you done Omega? Has anyone done Omega index out of interest? No.
Not
what was that, Anne-Marie?
No, I haven't. I was just thinking about that. So I am going to see the doctor. I've already got a referral for blood tests. But what do I need to actually ask to say a red cell magnesium test?
Yep, red cell magnesium is one of them. So in the original onboarding, you will have been sent a list of everything to get tested.
Yeah.
I can resend that to you. But certainly red cell magnesium, full iron panel as a female, really important. Caroline, if you're speaking, I think you're on mute. No, that's all right, you're on mute. I didn't know if you were trying to talk. And then Omega index would be private pay, Anne-Marie, in Australia. I know it's not covered under Medicare, the Omega index, because I've had to pay for it before. It's about $60, I think, in Australia, weirdly. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Cool.
It's just, as you know, going to doctors here, it's hard. You think you're asking for something and then you're not really getting what you're asking for. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll send you that in the chat on your app, and so you've got that full panel, and you can just show it to him and just read it out.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Cool, no problems. Yeah, so no one's done Omega Index, which isn't surprising. It's not something typically done, but I would certainly recommend it. Red cell magnesium, certainly. And then in terms of you all being endurance athletes, a full iron panel is, like, I cannot stress how important it is for male or female. It's really, really important. So does anyone else have any other questions? Certainly we can provide links to, in terms of food, as we said, food first, all the foods that Elizabeth outlined for plant-based, and if you're omnivore, eating that, certainly most important. In terms of links to supplements, certainly in terms of the iron supplementation in America is a bit of a minefield. I find certainly you can't get Multifor, you can't get another one called Ferrograde C, which we have in Australia. So I think it's Hemaplex, but that's a chelated iron source. It's a little bit different. Hemaplex, and I can't remember the other ones that are there, but certainly we can have a look at.
Hemogenics is the one that I've had the most success with, and that was
Okay.
recommended by my doctor.
And that was recommended by Kiki, probably, was it?
Mhm.
Yeah, so Dr. Silva, I think, recommends that Hemogenics one. And so that could be something, again, to look at, but we can direct you with some links towards that. And then in terms of fish oil supplementation, there is the Pillar one, which was said. I also like Nordic Naturals. So they do a cod liver oil if you're happy taking a liquid. I sort of have sometimes a little bit of what I call pill fatigue, where just swallowing pills becomes a little bit too much. So trying a liquid fish oil, it's not for everyone. It still has a fish taste. So if you're not happy with that, then certainly I'd stick to pills. And then in terms of the magnesium, obviously that triple magnesium by Pillar is a very good product. And, I'd certainly stand by it as recommending it. Does anyone have?
Question.
Yeah.
Besides going through your regular doctor, because sometimes asking for all these testing, if you don't present any symptoms or you don't need it, it's kind of no point to argue there. Inside Tracker, will they provide all those biomarkers? Is that a good source, or where else?
Yeah. So Omega Quant, you can just book online. You can just do that and request the HEMA spot, and they'll send it to you. So that's no problem. In terms of Inside Tracker, will do a blood draw for you. You would probably typically request the ultimate, but I believe that's about $600 or $700. So certainly
that Omega Index.
What's that?
And the ultimate doesn't do the Omega Index.
Correct. So you would have to get the Omega Quant test on top of that. If you do the Inside Tracker Ultimate, certainly put in whatever discount code you can get to maximum amount off. I think we get 25% off. I think it's Fuelin Pro 25, and I think that gives you 25% off. I think over Christmas they did some 50% off things. If you can try and track down some discount codes like that and get 50% off, if you could get it for $300, then I'd say it's probably pretty good, and that's probably what you get charged by your doctor anyway in America. So,
and I can reach out and see if and when they have put some feelers out for when the next sale is coming.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of getting your testing done as well, like I think November is a really good time to get it, just before you hit winter, and then sort of 6 months after that, so around April, May. So you're sort of doing that 6 month split. You're going just before going into winter and then just before coming into summer. So that will give you a good indication, especially about things like your vitamin D levels, which we'll discuss next week. Covering that and making sure you're optimal with that, looking at your iron levels leading into off season, leading into maybe the peak season. That's going to be really important as well. Omega is obviously just tracking that long term and looking at that as more like, okay, I want to make sure that I'm in that 8 to 12%. And then magnesium, obviously tracking that and making sure it's having a positive impact on whatever it is you're trying to have a positive impact on, whether that's health or performance. Cool. Okay. Whew. There's a lot of territory covered there, so hopefully it wasn't too overwhelming. Certainly, if you need to rewatch it, watch it. If there's feedback, come back to us. Certainly, you can ask us questions.